Thanks for the generous introduction and welcome. A little bit more about myself in the defence space. I was here for Anzac Day and met a bunch. It was like an SF jamboree at Olam's, and talking to a whole bunch of people, and they asked me why I'd become so interested in the ADF and security issues. I said, I think, for years and years I'd been covering war zones, and I'd seen some pretty horrible behaviour all across the world. But when I'd been to Rwanda, when I'd been to East Timor and other places, and I saw the Australians at work, I really thought I saw something different. I really thought they brought something to that environment that talks about that EQ and IQ. There was an empathy, there was a sensitivity, there was not just muscle. And I also thought, this is something that I ought to be paying more attention to, the issue of peacekeeping. So I spent some time educating myself in the ways of the ADF. After sitting here for a day or so, I'm wondering how far I've got to go, because I actually had to ask Tom yesterday what SFA meant. I thought it meant something completely different. But look, the sum total is I've long been impressed by the communication skills of ADF personnel. From day one, they are taught to listen and comprehend. Over time, given their lives may depend on it, they learn to be concise. But these high-order communication skills are practiced within. Their ability and effectiveness in exporting their important message is another story. And I've long argued that communication to the broader community, which enables understanding and generates trust, is as important a battlefront as any other. It continues to strike me as ironic that Australians accept Anzac culture as central to national identity, while often having little contact with current serving personnel and little understanding of the modern battlefront. When I did begin to report on Afghanistan and came back with the pictures and the landscape, the sense of that environment, one of the big surprises for me was the way the Australian public responded. Absolutely shocked, for some here. At this point, we'd been there for about 6 or 7 years, and they still didn't know. They still thought their image of a battlefront was born of the Western Front, of World War I and perhaps World War II, of a no man's land, tangles of barbed wire, opposing trenches, an enemy in a different uniform. It still hadn't caught up with them. So the story of the battlefront, kinetic or non-kinetic, fought in the human space, that had gone completely missing. And I know, as I've heard lamented here, that the story of Afghanistan, I've always thought a really important story, became a narrative of loss. 42 killed in 14 years. Our politicians going to the funerals, somehow that became centre place in the Australian mindset. And astonishing, considering that 100 years earlier, in a population a quarter the size, we were losing on average 50 a day. So I never thought we got that right. This story, the story of capacity building and building domestic support for train, advise and assist missions, is as important and challenging a public education exercise as any I've encountered. And for some time now I've been absorbed by the Afghanistan story and on something of a mission of my own to engage the Australian public with the modern soldier and the new world of warfare. To me, the question so popular with the public, why we were in Afghanistan, was never as important as the one of what strategies we adopted once we were there. After all, the United States was attacked on September 11. The subsequent Afghanistan mission had wide global support, and for quite some time there was goodwill among a majority of Afghans who sought productive intervention. So now, after a 15 years blood trail, the even more important question is, given all that, why couldn't we find a way to win? With all the benefit of hindsight unavailable back in 2001, we can see a slowness to comprehend the importance of signing on to the Afghan way. We were never going to expeditiously rebuild the place in the shape of Canberra or The Hague. The struggle for cohesion among 50 allies was never going to be easy. As someone said yesterday, it wasn't that Afghanistan was complicated, we were complicated too. And clearly crucial ground was lost after 2003 by the Iraq distraction. The Australian soldier scholar David Kilcullen, mentioned always at these conferences, sees the decision to invade Iraq with the job in Afghanistan unfinished as, quote, the greatest strategic screw-up since Hitler's invasion of Russia. US Secretary of Defence Robert Gates was at odds with his president on that question. The Canadian general who commanded ISAF in 2004, Rick Hillier, saw that not only did Iraq deprive the mission in Afghanistan of resources and momentum, but it also helped deliver for the Taliban confidence and strategic direction for a nascent resurgence. People were also talking about the importance of getting in early. So I go back to those early years in Afghanistan because they frame the most obvious period of lost opportunity. When 2 Squadron SASR rotated back at the end of 2002, they did so not only because the one-year commitment ended, but also because there was so little to do. Long-range patrols frequently returned to Bagram with barely, if ever, a shot fired. The SFTG media officer back then, Major Tony Park, anybody know Tony Park? He's a famous author now. He writes all these novels out of Africa. But anyway, I interviewed him for this, going back to 2002, and he said at that stage most of the hardliners had gone. More and more patrols would come back saying that what we needed to do is rebuild, provide more humanitarian support. So it seemed to me that what we needed to roll in then was something the world did not have, an army with weapons other than rifles, of anthropologists, aid workers, bankers, medicos, agronomists, who could elevate a very basic standard of living and do whatever possible to maintain the peace. When we contemplate the shape of train, advise and assist missions, it seems to me the periods in Afghanistan when we more evidently lose the peace are worth studying. One to do so, Rajiv Chandra, I knew I'd get this wrong, Chandrasekaran chose Deadwood for the title of one chapter of his book, Little America. He presented some evidence to demonstrate career public servants are not always best suited for frontier work. That what was needed were Indiana Jones type skill sets from qualified people who can live rough, take risks, genuinely connect with communities to help fund and facilitate practical, effective assistance. Chandrasekaran writes about US aid recruiting one such person who became swiftly disillusioned, dividing embassy staff into 3 categories. Those who'd come to Afghanistan because they wanted to make a lot of money, those seeking promotion to a softer posting, and those seeking to escape an unhappy personal life. The recruit noted, quote, "It was rare to hear someone say they were there because they wanted to help the Afghans." A study of particular interest to Australians, this Australian anyway, is Daniel Green's The Valley's Edge. Because Green worked in Uruzgan in 2005 and 2006, another important period where we falter between kinetic and non-kinetic objectives. Green was a US naval reservist and political advisor with the State Department, and he worked with the Provincial Reconstruction Team, which preceded the Australian and Dutch PRTs. Again, he's not too charitable about staff who didn't want to deploy far beyond the comfort and security of the embassy compound. Quote, "One officer weighed 375 pounds and couldn't put on his body armour. Another had a double hip replacement. Another needed a walking stick," and so on. So, you obviously do look for rounded personalities with both the EQ and the IQ, but I don't think I meant that kind of roundedness. Green concedes many a mistake as the US PRT struggled for traction. They had their QIPs, Quick Impact Projects, we had our Backyard Blitz. And as the Australian captain Michael Scott observed, when he turned up to take over, the job was more about first-time construction than reconstruction. You know, you wouldn't start the journey from here, so to speak. I think that's a problem too in the narrative of the whole Afghanistan mission, that Australia has never really understood the low base that we operated from. I think that book, The Valley's Edge, is worth a read, because within Green you see something of these binary skills, the approach we come to recognise as crucial. In 2005, Australia redeployed Special Forces and then the first Reconstruction Task Force. Special Forces, as you know, returns and then has to go back within about 5 months. So more ground is lost as everyone struggles to connect security and development, kinetic and non-kinetic objectives, by which time you might argue with hindsight, of course, that we never had at the time, it was all too late. And when there was a push for a civilian surge in 2008 and 2009, finding appropriate personnel taxed everyone, including the Americans and the Australians. There aren't that many Fred Smiths out there. I can remember sitting with Fred and Shuras in the Mirabad. Indeed, when the US applied diplomatic pressure to increase the Australian contribution, Fred's father, Special Envoy Rick Smith, was quoted as stating, "Australia did not have a culture of deploying civilians into a war zone." One of the few certain observations you can make about the Afghanistan mission is that it always defied simplification. Communicating complexity in a digital age, sometimes defined by the acronym TLDNR, too long did not read, is more than usually challenging. In the panoply of storytelling options, I've long argued long-form media works best. The extended print article, book, current affairs report or documentary series has more scope to accommodate the complex and abstract. While this kind of report won't achieve the coverage of daily news, it does tend to be more influential, not only in the public space, but with other media. When it comes to train, advise, assist story, we can reflect on the training school, which I saw in the opening clip there, which was established in Camp Holland back in 2006 and always offered up to visiting media. Reporters who worked in a time frame of 400 to 500 words or 1 or 2 TV minutes were rarely interested. They needed action and dynamism. A story about teenagers and power tools working on a stitch in the fabric of civilization was harder to sell. Although all old media, including television, struggles to maintain an audience, television continues to have significant reach. There is more of a three-dimensional element to long-form television, which helps capture the important atmospherics that go somewhere towards encouraging the public to connect and care. Television is commonly regarded as a medium for personalities rather than ideas, better suited to entertaining than educating. An unfair, incomplete view by my reckoning, considering what I've seen good television can achieve. Not that I can deny that just like Afghanistan, there aren't a million ways to get it wrong. My industry has many faces, even beyond the public commercial demarcation, there are further divides. The next speaker, Ian McPhedran, hello Ian, and myself both come from the news industry, where we judge the importance of a topic not so much on the basis of whether it's good or bad, but whether it's news. And here again is the challenge of developing creative partnerships between sometimes warring factions. Journalists can't be authorities on everything. Our training is principally in storytelling. Journalists are frequently reliant on experts to provide content. And here we approach this danger zone, encompassing the quarrel of experts versus expertise. If a program is not driven by news principles, but rather sets out simply to be good television that attracts a maximum audience, you'll encounter a clear bias against experts, the industry view being that experts are people more interested in being understood by other experts than the broader public. You know, my old executive producer in the ABC documentaries used to say, we are not giving the public homework. I admit to my shame that when casting for a television program, we would choose the good communicator over the better scholar every time. No matter how worthy the message, if it doesn't connect, we're hardly doing our best. Although I should be on my side of the argument of who should have the lead, the storyteller or the expert, I've come to the view that television producers should be doing more to make that particular creative partnership work. Another problem that comes under much the same heading is the one of vetting. When working in particular in the military space, journalists can be required to adjust editorial principles. After all, human life does trump a good story. We should understand that we should not divulge tactics, techniques and procedures that could get our people killed. But here is a struggle. Good journalism is mostly good judgment, which must also hold firm to precepts of public interest. So neither should we allow truth to become a first casualty because someone has managed to confuse operational security with secrecy. This is a line that myself and I'm sure Ian has walked many times. And practically, realistically, I found it much easier to navigate than many of our colleagues would believe. You know, I can think of all the reporting that I did from Afghanistan and all the sitting down and talking about what we could or couldn't say. At the end of the day, we never really had any frightful arguments about it. It was all pretty clear. To be frank, and I'm writing another book about the ADF, I've got to the point where I actually really welcome good vetting, if you can get it, most particularly for the sake of ensuring accuracy. But again, finding the right partnership is the challenge. The ADF is also a many-headed beast. If you ask someone from SASR to vet an account of a two-commando mission, you would do so at some peril. For every mission, there'll be a range of authorities, yet having a range of authorities vet a narrative is a recipe for failure. The great likelihood being an impossible stew of changes will be sought. And as I found, we can work it out, although I somehow doubt in a way that completely immunises us from all complaint. Throughout the past decade, I've come to know many servicemen and women, and in doing so developed excellent creative partnerships. There are many people in this room I've got to know well and trust and admire. Even the picture up there I instantly recognised, worked with both those people. There you are, Cam. Hi. You know, it's enriched my life. We've shared a commitment to improving public understanding. The relationships are not always easy, but inevitably worthwhile. It can be hard for any of us to accept conciliation as necessary. We don't own our own story. We don't own our reputation, and this one is hard. We don't individually own the history either. When approaching a partnership with media, my advice is to be discriminating and try to understand the wide spectrum of choices. Just like you, we're not all the same, and not every report is best suited to Four Corners or the Daily Telegraph. When identifying someone to work with, I would say go for the person with the reputation for getting it right over the person who appears to be on your side. This is a trap that seems to regularly ensnare defence. It stands to reason the person prepared to be on your side will be equally prepared to turn against you. Defence is regularly blamed for communications failures, and never entirely fairly so. The government, the media, the public have responsibilities too. I think, democracy really only works with active participation. We're not allowed to blame the public, but I must say, the older I get, the more often I do that, what I'm not allowed to do. you know, the government, the media, the public have responsibilities too, but despite bleating about this forever, the ADF still has that tendency to communicate within. So I think there should be a stronger link near the top of that chain of command that's sensitive, more sensitive to the obligation to report as well to the public. To me, the recently announced review of Special Forces could have been seen coming a mile off. If that battle space is not well understood, if all that static is allowed to develop in a vacuum generated by a lack of transparency, events and incidents will so much more readily be reconstructed as scandal. And then something else goes missing, you know, that the ability for the public to accept a threshold of pain and risk. You know, it will always be a bridge too far, something else that was talked about yesterday. So I'll end with another question for consideration by all parties, a question for the ages. How much do we keep a hold on information because of operational security concerns, and how much do we do so because we fear the public won't stomach it? Thank you.